As always, please retry this question before watching the video. There are several things that you need to know to be able to answer this question. Please make sure to add them to your cheat sheet and master them and go back 5 for each one that you don't know before continuing in the video. First, what is the easiest way to recognize a dependent clause? And that's if it starts with a dependent clause marker. Remember, this is one of the main things we're trying to retrain your brains on. Your school probably taught you to recognize independent dependent clause based on if it can stand alone as a sentence or if it has a complete thought. But there's a much easier way, and that's by just looking at the first word. If the first word is a dependent clause marker, it is almost certainly a dependent clause. If it is not, then it is almost certainly an independent clause. It really is that simple. So please make sure that you are working on training your brain in this new habit of just looking at the first word to determine if it's a dependent clause marker or not. What is the easiest way to recognize we have an independent clause? And that is if it does not start with a dependent clause marker. Super simple. What are the 10 magic words? So to make dependent clause markers even easier for you, we're just simplifying down to the 10 most common dependent clause markers that you're going to see on the ACT. Hopefully you know there are others. There are 4 main types of dependent clause markers: subordinate conjunctions, relative pronouns, prepositions, and participles. But the 10 most common ones are going to be our subordinate conjunctions and our relative pronouns. And that is going to be because, while, when, since, whereas, who, whom, whose, which, that. Again, it's because, while, when, since, whereas, who, whom, whose, which, that. If you have not memorized this yet, please take the time right now, add it to your cheat sheet, and memorize these. Drill this over and over until you get these down. We are giving you gold. This is the key to this system being so easy if you just have these memorized and can recognize them rapid and fast. So, what are the 3 main sentence structures? Independent plus independent, independent plus dependent, and dependent plus independent. How do you punctuate independent plus independent? The 5 ways. What are the 5 ways? 5 ways: comma, fanboys, period, semicolon, M dash, colon. Okay, please note, comma fanboys is entirely something different than a comma. Please train your brain to see those things as 2 absolutely different ideas. A comma is something entirely separate from comma fanboys. You're not just adding a fanboys to a comma. It's just make it entirely separate as 2 different things, which will help your brain on the ACT. With those in mind, we'll go ahead and take a look at question number 20. And we're going to start from the beginning. The animals thrived on Lord Howe's Island until 1918, when a British supply ship ran aground while the ship was being repaired. Rats escaped onto the island and quickly wiped out the stick insects. So, we recognize that this is a clause question because in each of the answers, the punctuation is changing from answer to answer. So we're going to do the WTD for clause questions, which is consider the 3 things for each answer individually. When we consider it, we find that there isn't punctuation in the middle of a clause, there is an independent clause in a sentence, and the clauses are separated improperly. So clauses separated improperly, this is a clause 3. And usually when you find one thing wrong with one answer, it's going to be the same thing wrong with the other answers, as is the case here. So let's take a look here deeper on answer F to look where the error is in separating the clauses. We got to determine the sentence structure first. The animals thrived on Lord Howe Island until 1918. That is an independent clause. The animals thrived is our subject-verb combo. It does not start with a dependent clause marker, / it does not start with one of our 10 magic words. Therefore, this is an independent clause. The animals thrived on Lord Howe Island until 1918, when a British supply ship ran aground. All right, so a British supply ship ran, that is going to be a clause. It's a subject-verb combo. And it starts with when, which is one of our 10 magic words. So this is a dependent clause. And they separated this by a comma, which is how you separate independent followed by dependent. That is properly done. So now we're going to continue on. While the ship was being repaired, rats escaped onto the island and quickly wiped out the stick insects. So while the ship was is another subject-verb combo. and it starts with the dependent clause marker while. So this is a dependent clause, and we can sometimes separate dependent clauses without a comma. This one doesn't have a comma, which it probably should, but it's not necessarily wrong yet. So let's keep reading on. Rats escaped onto the island. Rats escaped is subject verb combo. It does not start with a dependent clause marker, and therefore we have an independent clause. So, because this is one really long sentence, starting with the animals and ending with insects, and we have two independent clauses in this sentence. The animals thrived on Lord Howe Island until 1918, and rats escaped onto the island and quickly wiped out the stick insects. Those are two independent clauses. So anytime, it doesn't matter how many other dependent clauses or how many other things are between them, if you have two independent clauses in a singular sentence, it must have one of the five ways somewhere between them. Somewhere between them. And answer F does not. So answer F is wrong because the clauses are separated improperly. Okay? So now let's look at answer G. The animals thrived on Lord Howe Island until 1918. That is still an independent clause. Nothing changed there. When a British supply ship ran aground, and while the ship was being repaired, rats escaped onto the island and quickly wiped out the stick insects. So we still have two independent clauses in the sentence. Nothing changed as far as how many independent clauses there are. Therefore, we still must have one of the five ways somewhere between these two independent clauses. And answer G does not. So we can eliminate answer G. Answer H will skip. Answer J, the animals thrived on Lord Howe Island until 1918. So everything is the same here. While the ship was being repaired, rats escaped. Everything is the same here. The only thing they did was put a comma in front of while, which is better than it was on answer F. But we still have the problem of having two independent clauses in the sentence, and there's not one of the five ways separating them. Therefore, answer J is wrong. So let's look at it being done properly now. Answer H solves this problem. It puts a period in front of while, which gives us an independent clause in the first sentence, and then it creates an entirely new sentence that has an independent clause. So now there is one of the five ways somewhere between the two independent clauses, giving us answer H as our correct answer. If you didn't track with this, that's okay. You don't need to add it to your worksheet. If this made sense to you, if it finally clicked, please go ahead and add it to your worksheet, master it, and then go ahead and do the remaining clause 3 questions that you missed on this test. If this is the last clause 3 question that you missed on this test, please go ahead and do the clause 3 mastery until you get 10 questions correct in a row. Then move on to the next category that you miss the most of.